I gave a talk last year, which was trying to figure out what the shape of the open source story was. It comes from this idea that Kurt Vonnegut put together that every story has a shape, and we can put it into these commonly used shapes that are reused over and over and over and over again throughout stories that we tell. And there's a really great video that I've linked in the slides, and this infographic that I'm using that I've linked as well, to see him talk about the shapes of stories, and it's really hilarious. So the x-axis is time, and then the y-axis is happiness. So it's essentially a plot of happiness over time. And some of the common stories that he has are the main and whole stories. The main character gets into trouble and then gets out of it again. Boy meets girl, main character starts at a regular, fine, meets somebody, super happy, something happens, super sad, and then somehow they end up back together happily ever after. And I can go on and on and on, but he has all of these different story types that he talks about that are very fitting, and you can find examples of them through everything that you're watching. So I challenge you in the next film you watch or book you read to see if you can put this into one of those shapes of stories. There's a few more. The creation story, Old Testament, New Testament, Cinderella, that one's really popular. But what I really wanted to know was what the shape of the open source story was. And I would posit that it is the main and whole, but instead of the main character getting into trouble and get out of it again and ends up happier, I think they end up in the same place again. So it starts with this little line at the beginning. A little bit lower, you get nerd sniped, really happy, working on an exciting problem. And then as you're working on it, trying to get adoption, trying to find contributors, all of that work, you burn out. And you find some way, something encouraging happens to get you out of that burnout again, and over and over and over and over again until eventually you take up beekeeping. We want to prevent that. We want to do more to support open source projects, open source maintainers. That's something that I care a lot about. And this talk is titled Towards a Better Adoption Model, so that we can do what we can to help maintainers, help projects gain the adoption that they so rightfully deserve. My name's Nigel. I'm a senior open source software developer advocate. I work on the Valkey project. I'm very much an open source enthusiast, both software and hardware. The main thing that I do is push for Valkey adoption and integration. And this talk came about because of an adoption by coincidence. We were doing a booth at State of OpenCon, State of OpenCon in London last year, and I happened to be sitting next to another booth, OpenBao. And we got to chatting about what OpenBao is and how it works, and they said that they used to use Redis. And for context, Valkey is a hard fork of Redis, so it's completely compatible. And so they said they pulled it out because Redis changed their license to no longer be open source, and they wanted to only have open source projects in their project, which is admirable. And as we got to talking, they figured out that, we pulled Redis out, but we can put Valkey in, and just by us happen to be put in the same booth next to each other, we were able to get another adoption story for open source and support each other's projects. Now, that adoption by coincidence isn't really easy to repeat. It was a coincidence that our booths got sat next to each other, but we're both projects under the Linux Foundation. Like, why haven't we been in communication before? Why don't we know about each other and are working together to get our projects adopted together? So there's one issue with this talk, and that is that it was submitted as a lightning talk. And we have a full session of 40 minutes, so I'm going to ask for some participation, and we'll see how we do. But the long and short of it is we'll probably be getting out of here a little early, so you all can get ready for Meow Wolf tonight. What prevents you from adopting? So let's say that whatever your role is, you hear about a new open source project. What is it that stops you from immediately adopting it? Time? Okay. That's a big problem. Like, it does take time for and energy for maintainers to integrate a new project? Is that the only thing that would stop you from, let's say you hear about this great new thing, it's like, if I had the time, I would integrate every single thing.
Potentially cost of change if you have an existing thing that you're replacing.
Cost of change, that's another one. There's a lot of friction with adopting new technologies, with figuring out new tech stacks. That's an important thing to consider. And this talk was especially targeted towards the use of forks because of OpenBao being the fork of Vault, and there being a ton of other forks like OpenSearch, OpenTofu, Valkey. And so when there is market share already and seeing those projects already having adoption, so let's say that there is no friction. So you have infinite time, there's no friction, it's a drop-in replacement. What else would prevent adoption? We've created a utopia?
No, I think your example of coincidence is an important one because it's lack of awareness. I think it boils down to lack of awareness of what else is out there.
Exactly. How do we get the word out? How do we make people more aware of the options that they have available to them? And we can do things like having prominent booths on the display floor, which has been great for people walking by, but that's another coincidence. It's not really intentional for us to be able to get the word out, to let people know that, hey, we're here, we exist, we want to help you. And I asked the same question for maintainers now for integrating. Are there any other factors that we should consider when we're talking about the cost of integration besides time, besides awareness, besides friction? Dependencies. So what dependencies are needed in order for integration as well? Okay. So this talk, I'm not positing a solution. I'm trying to show that we have a problem and trying to get the conversation started for how we make it better. So I'm not here to solve it today. I just want to make it known that, hey, this is something that exists. Oh, yeah, if there's more audience participation, we have a microphone that we can pass around.
And it's also being recorded. So
Yeah, for the recording. Yeah, I've been trying to repeat the answers, but, yeah, for the recording. So I want to get started with a few ideas that I have for how we can be more intentional and work together better as a foundation, as projects. The first one is better functionality tagging. So I think that we're not creating the same apps over and over again, but we are creating a lot of the same functionality over and over again. And this idea comes from, I used to work as a sound engineer before I got into tech, and it comes from this idea of the Music Genome Project, which came from the Human Genome Project, like how do we map the human genome, how do we map music? This was something that Pandora was doing, like what are the different qualities of music that we can map so that I can make a better recommender engine for your music. So if you like this song, then I know you're gonna like this song. And not necessarily making a recommendation engine for applications and integrations, but if we had better functionality tagging to say, this will act as a key value store. And we have all of the key value stores listed under the Linux Foundation. There are groups, but it's not as specific as it could be, where we drill down into what the specific functionality of the app is. Let's say I need something that can do message queuing or message passing. So we have all of these options that are available to you. So if we had a system in which you could type in some functionality that you needed, and then it would populate all of the projects under the Linux Foundation that did that specific thing that you were looking for, that's one idea for us being able to get that awareness, to solve that awareness problem that you were talking about, to be able to let people know the other options of projects that are out there for them. The second idea that I had was encouraged or incentivized dog fooding. We want to be like those companies that were selling the dog food, saying we're feeding this to our own dogs. If we won't buy it, why should we expect you to? So that's a case for projects under the Linux Foundation to do more to adopt each other, because we've passed a quality bar, and it goes a long way for us to show solidarity with the foundation. I don't think there should be cumbersome requirements. So 2 stories. One is, if you're a project under the Apache Software Foundation, if there's an integration in your project that is required for your project to run, the license must be Apache or more permissive. And I don't necessarily know that that is the policy that we should adopt, because it is kind of cumbersome, and it creates an issue when there are license rug pulls, like with the Elasticsearch, like with Redis, like with so forth and so on. That requirement, it takes time for people to kind of recognize that they have that need, and then to make the changes, and they're forced to make them, which maybe doesn't engender a lot of enthusiasm about your project or your tool. We don't want to force people to use it. We want them to use it because they want to use it. But if there was some way that we could encourage or incentivize people to make that step for adoption. I think that another great idea that we could have is a creation of an audit or a working group that's specifically looking at what are the opportunities for other projects to engage with each other. So one thing that I did for Valkey, for a conference that was upcoming that I wasn't able to make it to, it was a KubeCon in London, and they have the solution showcase in KubeCon. They tell you every project that's going to be there. And I knew that there were some people from the Valkey project that were going. And so what I did was I went through every single project's GitHub repository and searched for the word Redis and searched for the word Valkey, and to see what projects had dependencies on Redis, so that we could make a targeted attempt to talk to these booths and be able to share with them, you know, hey, Valkey exists, it would be great if you adopted it. Now, this sort of adoption by, let's call it brute force, probably isn't sustainable. But if we had a group of people who are working together with knowledge of each domain under the Linux Foundation, who were working to audit each of the separate projects to say, hey, there's an opportunity here, you could adopt this LF project with very little friction, or we can help you make this adoption or offer this as another option as an extension. Yeah, those are the 3 main ideas that I have. Does anybody else have thoughts or ideas about what we might be able to do?
So to further go on that last one, is there an opportunity, if you take your first one about tagging and then you basically get some way to create an LLM that can go through and make those suggestions? We had an NVIDIA engineer that talked at the beginning of this conference about the work that we're using AI to look at what needs to be backported in kernel, right? Kernel features and kernel fixes need to be backported. And so I think if you had the kind of infrastructure, the bones of what you're talking about for the functionality tagging, plus subject matter expertise that you could capture and feed into an LLM, you could potentially do what you're talking about.
Yeah, and so I haven't always been the most bullish on LLMs and LLM usage, but that is a really great use case and would help with the problem of finding people and effort if we were able to define these things well enough for a system to be able to do the audit, and then we have a human, a group that's working together to check these things and then to validate and then to share with, Matt.
As you said that, it just reminded me, this also would mean that potentially as new projects come into the LF, that part of the onboarding is figuring out how they automatically get the right tagging and get the right things to feed into future training of that LLM, or just the ability to find them, right? There's got to be something where the LF does a better job of, as they do onboarding, of capturing that information.
I completely agree. This idea came about when I was thinking about projects being onboarded into the LF, because we have a blank slate. We have an opportunity to adopt at the earliest point, or to even help these projects, especially in their infancy, because a lot of times what people are asking me for when I'm at the booth talking about Valkey is like, who's using this? Like what companies, what success stories do you have? And for a new project, it can be hard. For a young project, it can be hard. But if we're able to say, oh, we're in use by 60% of Linux Foundation projects, or like these projects that you know the name of, they all have dependencies or are integrating our project, that goes a long way for a new person. So one of the other things that I think prevents people from changing is prestige. Like people don't want to take a risk on a new project unless they know that somebody else has done it. Like we were talking to some folks from a financial services company, and they were saying, yeah, we know about Valkey, we want to change, but we have all these requirements, we want to make sure. So like once the cloud providers are doing it, it's like, no, they are. The cloud providers have it. It's like, okay, well, once there's enterprise support, it's like, no, we have that too. Well, once there's this and this, and the more that I said, we have all of these things that you're asking for, the more it's like, well, it just takes time. We just need to like give it some more time to see if this project is going to be okay. Any other ideas? No? So what are the results of this new reality that we're living in, where we have all of these tagging capabilities, we have all of these searching capabilities, we have all of these matching capabilities for projects to be able to work together? The first thing I think is that it gives meaningful first issues for new contributors. I think that's something that people want and are looking for. And I am very pro, like good first issues being documentation, but a lot of times people want to dig into the code. And something like integrating a new tool isn't as big a lift as getting to know the entire code base and being able to make meaningful changes to a project that's written in C, for example. Whereas if we just need some integration with something else, like that is a lot easier to set up and gives people an opportunity to sink their teeth in, get to know the code base, and be encouraged by seeing that their contributions are valuable. I also think that it is an added benefit to being a part of the Linux Foundation. Like, what do you get just by being a member? I think that better communication, better collaboration, better cooperation between projects is one thing that's severely lacking, and it should be a part of being a part of this foundation. I think that I was speaking earlier about adoption stories, increasing traction at the beginning and more adoption stories. And then just, because I think it would be nice, sunshine and rainbows on the other side of us creating this utopia. We're not going to solve it all right now. Again, this was just to present the problem that we've been having and to try to get us toward a solution. But we're going to try, and we're going to keep trying. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much. Are there any questions or thoughts or?
Sorry, not trying to monopolize, but I had another thought. LFX.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
LFX has, I know you're chuckling for the same reasons I chuckle about LFX. It seems like the Linux Foundation is already on a path to trying to do some things like that. Mm-hmm. Is the LFX group a potential avenue for you to make that happen?
I think so. I think there's utility in a conversation with LFX, especially with like how they're doing the insights, and if we have insight into like more projects and the particulars. Yeah, I think maybe that would be a good result of this conversation, a good place to start. So maybe I'll just forward them this talk once it gets posted to YouTube. Any other thoughts or ideas? Oh.
The tagging, I thought, was awesome, and the pool and the team to analyze it makes a lot of sense using the bots. I feel like we could use that outside just to get more awareness in the market. I know that we use a lot of scrapers and other realms that are just searching, Google, if you will, and maybe this is a way that we could find ways to introduce Valkey and to people that would find it meaningful. Maybe just kind of opening up the scope.
Yeah, I would love to see this be a thing like those larger projects I talked about, like the Human Genome or the Music Genome Project, where we have like the App Genome Project, where every application that comes online, we're able to categorize it in these specific ways. I have this tendency to be a bit pie in the sky and idealist and wanting everything to be
Same.
amazing.
Yes.
And so I am trying to scope this down to say, let's just start with the LF, which is still a really big goal.
Yes.
But if we can prove the concept, then growing it to going to other foundations like Apache.
Yes.
And the other story that I was going to tell before was the same was a financial services company who was under the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they had a requirement as well that it was like you have to be using open source, and so they ripped out Redis, put Valkey in, which was great. But for these other people who have these examples where they need a tool that does a thing but open source. Like if we have tooling, like you're saying, that you can just type in functionality and it doesn't just search LF, but all projects that are out there to be able to work together to build bridges between everyone. I would like that. I'm an idealist again.
There's certainly a number out there that believe they have an open source stack that may not now.
Yeah.
That certainly might just be interested in knowing that. But yeah, we do. I attended some sessions around specs and standards in the Linux Foundation. I think there's some play there. And around making a cache a primitive and part of a well-architected framework.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see that too. That's definitely stuff that would help the Valkey project. But yeah, I'm also interested in helping, all of the projects that are out there that are struggling in the same way to get the word out to get adoption.
Yeah, I think for adoption and more visibility, I think having hackathons or maybe into academia so that the future generation would know it better. Or probably they have to, in their academia, use, for instance, Valkey so that, more reach and something like that.
Yeah, I would like to see hackathons here at the conference for adoption amongst projects. Get a bunch of maintainers in a room together, say, my project does this thing, my project does that thing. How do we work together? And seeing them at that level, working together to integrate, but also you're saying academia, getting exposure to people in schools to open source to get better adoption that way. I've seen verticals at hackathons where it's okay, best use of this technology, you win this prize. And so I would like to see more open source projects doing that, or best use of open source in, I've seen that vertical in hackathons as well to encourage people using open source. So I do think that hackathons are another avenue towards a better adoption model. And I'm wondering how we can, under the Linux Foundation, under the CNCF, leverage the resources that we have here to, again, prove the concept and then take it on the road. Anyone else? Y'all ready for Meow Wolf? Well, thank you all so much again, and I'll see you around.